Welcome back to the Storytellers Podcast, where we dive into exploring the magic and the mysteries of this human experience through psychology, spirituality, and storytelling. I'm your host, Bela. I'm a Mexican mystic. I am a trauma specialist. I am a mentor to thousands of people all around the world, and I am a storyteller. And today's episode is going to be a conversation about how to heal the abandonment wound and the fear of rejection. I've noticed that this has been coming up a lot, not only for clients, but I noticed this fear come up within myself around a new friend that I made, and it reminded me that I, like many people, had a relatively chaotic and unstable upbringing. I had parents who went through a really nasty divorce in my formative years, and then I spent every other day changing houses and transporting myself on public transportation from one house to the other house. And this created a deep sense of instability and also a fear of abandonment within me because I watched my parents essentially abandon each other. So today we're going to be exploring the abandonment wound, how it relates back to childhood, and then also what you can do to heal that sense of abandonment and that fear of rejection that comes up when you've had an unstable or a chaotic upbringing. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So when you have an abandonment wound, it's like you are cut off from love. It's like you're disconnected with love. And this is almost always due to some kind of disconnect with your mother. Yes, your father can absolutely play a role in developing an abandonment wound or the fear of rejection, but because we grow in the bellies of our mothers, we feel every single thing that they are feeling. We're literally being bathed in a chemical bath of their hormones. And so if we can sense that they're having doubts about wanting to have us, or if they're struggling with insecurity, or if their cortisol levels are really, really high, we're feeling all of it and it affects us. So as we dive a little bit deeper into this topic, I invite you to just reflect on your own relationship or your own lack of relationship with your own mother and how that might have triggered a sense or a fear of abandonment or rejection within you. So the number one thing that you need to develop as a child in order to become a confident, empowered, and whole adult is a sense of safety, especially emotional safety. And you develop emotional safety by experiencing a reflective mirror that honors your emotional needs when you are still a child. When you're a child and your cognitive function is still developing and you're still learning how to use your body and you're still gaining an understanding of the world, your mother is your first mirror. So you look to her to learn how to relate. She's your first example of a relational dynamic, and she can often be the greatest source of emotional wounds. Now, if you didn't have a mother, your father likely played this role, but you probably developed that sense of abandonment or that fear of rejection because of that lack of presence from your maternal figure. The qualities that we need from our parents, especially from our maternal caretaker, in order to develop a secure attachment and in order to really learn to feel safe in who we are and safe in the world, are nurture, empathy, and protection. These are the three most important qualities to develop into a happy adult, and they are the greatest source of wounds. So oftentimes when people think of trauma, they think of the big T or the capital T traumas, like abuse or a catastrophic accident. But from a developmental perspective, not having felt safe or not having had an emotional mirror when you were a child can have a really, really deep trauma imprint as well. It's important to note that the way that you handle challenges as an adult directly mirrors how you were taught to handle challenges as a child, meaning it's not your fault, it's learned identity patterns, and it can be unlearned, and we'll be talking about how as we continue. Now, as someone who has spent a lot of time learning to heal her own abandonment wounds, and yes, they still come up from time to time, but I've really gotten better at handling them and knowing what to do when they arise. One concept that really helped me was the concept of emotional permanence. So when we are little babies, we don't understand object permanence. That's why when adults are playing peekaboo, the baby actually will be surprised when they uncover their eyes because suddenly the adult's there and then they're not. And, the child doesn't have this sense that the object or that the person is permanent. They imagine that the person's gone and then they see the person return. And they don't understand that the adult isn't going anywhere. But as that child begins to gain awareness and as their brain develops, they begin to understand that the object is still there even when they can't see it. Now, emotional permanence is the equivalent of object permanence that you either do or don't develop depending on your upbringing. Emotional permanence is when you can't tell that someone's emotions are there, but you trust that they exist anyways. So for example, when that person that you're waiting to hear back from doesn't text you back, you trust that that doesn't mean that they don't hate you. It just might mean that they're having a bad mental health day or something came up, or there's a million reasons why they couldn't be responding. But someone who doesn't have that sense of emotional permanence would likely go into a spiral of rumination and fear and worry that they're going to be abandoned or that they're being rejected or that that person doesn't like them anymore. Emotional permanence is when you trust that the people in your life accept you, they care about you, and they definitely don't hate you. But if you had an emotionally chaotic and unstable upbringing in which your parents weren't consistently there for you, meeting your emotional needs, you will most likely struggle with emotional impermanence, which is not trusting that someone's emotions will remain consistent towards you. This can show up as feeling really insecure in your relationship or doubting if your partner still loves you or needing a lot of extra reassurance. Or maybe after you hang out with your friends and you were really vulnerable, you start to doubt if you shared too much or if they're going to suddenly stop liking you because of what you chose to share. Now, it's also absolutely possible that you have friends or relationships or people in your life that actually also are mirroring back your emotional impermanence, meaning that they likely also had some kind of wound around abandonment or rejection, and they either might create a lot of distance or maybe they're a little bit overbearing, and your wounds can kind of feed off of one another. And so ultimately, if you do notice that your relationships are really quick to leave you and they're actually showing you concrete evidence that you are being rejected or that you are being abandoned, or that if you reveal your authentic self, these people pull away, then it's probably worth trying to find people who are going to accept you, see you, and love you in all of your expressions just the way you are. Of course, without putting your weight on them, carrying your own weight, but the people in your life should be able to be there for you, and they should be able to be willing to see you through even when you're going through it. And ultimately, it's just about reciprocity. So keep that in mind and just observe your friendships. And I'll be sharing some tips around how to really tell if your relationships are supportive and healthy, or if they maybe aren't so healthy after all. At its core, emotional impermanence is a lack of trust because you couldn't trust your caretakers to be there for you consistently, and because your parents abandoned you in some way, and so you begin to abandon yourself. And this is because the people who raise us are our first mirror of our worth in the world, and we begin to see ourselves through their eyes as we get older. That is the learned identity that we really, really work on dismantling and kind of shedding those layers of learned identity so that we can access our true selves in healing work. And when you're someone who struggles with emotional impermanence, the littlest things can set off that fear of abandonment or that fear of rejection, such as someone over-communicating or even just the change of their voice or under-communicating. But it always goes back to the parents, because when a child's needs aren't consistently met, they often become adults who are desperately seeking to have those needs met by everyone and anyone, or they become adults who withdraw and isolate but still struggle to meet their needs on their own. So this is a beautiful moment of reflection. Were your needs consistently met as a child? Because mine certainly weren't, and I have such wonderful parents. They did the best that they could with the resources that they had and with the wild upbringings that they had, and yet I still developed a whole lot of wounds that I had to explore and heal as an adult. And being aware of what those wounds were and this fear of abandonment that followed me through every major relationship and friendship in my life until I began to actually address it and change the way that I approached relational dynamics, it really, really followed me, and it was something that I had to admit to myself in order to actually begin healing it through inner child work. So now that we understand that the fear of abandonment and the fear of rejection comes back to our childhood wounds, because when we couldn't trust our parents, we learned that we can't trust ourselves either. And so what we have to do is we have to begin to cultivate a sense of emotional permanence and a sense of deep and lasting self-trust. Now, self-trust is something that I love to teach about. I actually created a journal that follows a 3-step method to support you in creating deep and lasting self-trust. And essentially, it's a relatively simple formula, but keyword simple, not easy. So the first step is actually taking the time to get to know yourself. And by getting to know yourself, I don't mean getting to know yourself through the lens of other people. It's really taking the time to explore you with your own eyes, letting go of everyone else's perceptions so that you can truly get to know your authentic essence. This also means doing a lot of unlearning work to unlearn these patterns that you developed as coping and survival mechanisms. The second step is keeping small promises to yourself, because the minute that you make a promise to yourself and you break it, you are subconsciously enforcing this idea that you aren't trustworthy. And so small promises are the most effective way to begin to redevelop that self-trust. Keyword here is small promises. So for example, if you want to start meditating, perhaps you just start with a 60-second meditation practice and build up from there so that you can really see yourself being consistent and begin to develop that trusting relationship. And then the third step to developing deep self-trust is learning how to hear your inner voice. And this is something that you learn with time. When you've done a lot of personal healing work, specifically with your inner child, you'll begin to recognize what voices are intrusive limiting beliefs that you learned from your caretakers and your parents and your first formative relationships, and what really is your inner voice. And you'll learn how to distinguish when it's anxiety versus when it's actually your intuition and your inner compass, your inner GPS saying yes versus no. So beyond following this 3-step method for developing self-trust, and I will link my self-trust journal below because it's a really accessible way to begin to cultivate this sense of self-trust so that you trust yourself enough to not abandon yourself. Because at its core, this fear of abandonment from the external world comes when we place our value and our worth in the hands of other people, as opposed to recognizing that you are inherently worthy without having to do or be anything other than what you are. So let's talk about what you can do to overcome this fear of abandonment and this fear of rejection. So there are 2 major groupings as far as practices and things that you can do to overcome this fear. The first is self-regulation, and the second one is co-regulation. So self-regulation is learning how to meet all of your own needs yourself. And for me, learning how to self-regulate and meet all of my own needs has been the most empowering part of my journey. And once I really learned how to self-regulate, I had to begin learning how to co-regulate. And I had to begin learning how to ask other people in my life to be there for me sometimes. There are many different tools for self-regulation and for co-regulation, all of which I teach in my various mentorships and courses. I actually have a program called Wonder Child, which is all about healing the wounds from childhood, like the ones we're talking about today, and getting back in touch with your childlike sense of wonder. So I'll drop the link for that below. And I also have an inner child facilitator training, and so I'll link the page for that below for any of you who would like to learn how to become a practitioner. But in my experience, the most effective tools for self-regulation are tools that combine both the subconscious and the somatic self for deep internal healing. And so I'll share a practice that I love to do with my clients with you now. This is an exercise for reparenting, but instead of calling it a remothering or a refathering practice, I like to use more inclusive terms like creating your own protector figure or creating your own nurturing figure. And so what you can do is you can use your imagination, which is one of the most incredible tools that you have at your disposal. They've actually done a lot of studies around people who have PTSD and how effective acting classes and improv classes can be for their healing, because if they never experienced a sense of wholeness or safety, but they can practice imagining and acting it out, their subconscious and their body stores that as if it were a new memory, because your subconscious actually can't tell the difference between a memory that's real or imagined. And so when you tap into your imagination and you use your subconscious and your somatic self to really imprint this new memory or this new belief, it's highly effective, and it's why my work has been so highly effective. So I would encourage you to imagine an ideal protector or an ideal nurturing figure Perhaps you imagine like a guardian angel, or perhaps you just imagine like a giant dragon, or maybe it's like a fairy godmother. Really, the sky's the limit. And what you can do is you can hold yourself and you can imagine that you are just meeting yourself with so much empathy, nurturing yourself or protecting yourself. And I would invite you to explore different kinds of somatic expressions of protection. So maybe if you want to feel protected, you would roll up into a little ball. Or perhaps if you wanted to feel nurtured, you would sit and you would gently stroke your face and your hands, and you would affirm things like, you are safe, sweet child, and imagine that you're really giving that sense of nurture, protection, or empathy to your inner child. Another really effective thing that you can do, it's a simple reframe, but it's helped me so many times when I am triggered. And by the way, when you get triggered and you react, you are revealing the places where you are not in your power and where your wounded inner child still continues to rule your life. So next time that you get triggered, notice how you react. Do you start slamming doors and walking out of the room, or do you start throwing major tantrums, or do you call names? I will be the first to admit that in all of my past relationships, when there was conflict, I would be so quick to get up and pack my backpack and get out of the house and just leave, because that's what my parents did. I watched my mom do that. And so it was a learned behavior, and it was so hard for me to stop doing that, because I was so afraid of being abandoned or rejected that I just thought, okay, I have to be the first one to leave to protect myself. Oof. I mean, ouch, poor little Bela. So next time you get triggered, notice your behavior, notice the thoughts, become aware of what you're thinking, and see if you can ask yourself, okay, when was the first time I felt this way? And likely there will be some memory from childhood or from adolescence when somebody made you feel stupid or small or abandoned or rejected. And then as soon as you have that, without getting lost in the story, just ask yourself, what did that past version of me need to be okay? So perhaps your child self felt misunderstood and like no one ever listened to them. And so when you think about what you need, maybe you need to feel heard. And so if this was me, what I would do is I would go sit in front of the mirror, look into my own eyes as if I were perceiving the soul beneath the surface. And I would make sure that she knew that I am always here to listen to her and to make sure that her voice is heard and that she feels like her voice is important. And I would affirm that to myself. I would say whatever I need to say, and I would look into my own reflection and I would say, your voice is so important. You are so heard and held here. And I would just really focus on meeting her needs. And then I would probably give her a little bit of nurture and bring in the somatic piece a little bit. Now, there are many, many ways that you can self-regulate. You can practice the box breath or a simple breathing technique and affirmations and things of that nature. I have a tendency to prefer subconscious and somatic tools in combination, as they tend to help us in all four major aspects of our human selves: our conscious mind, our subconscious mind, our body, our somatic self, and our soul. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you can do to co-regulate and to begin building healthier relationships where you don't have to feel so afraid of being abandoned or rejected, and where you can begin to work through that wound. So first things first, I'm a big believer in front-loading the weirdest parts of yourself. So if you are making a new friendship, or if you want to change your relationship with the people that are currently in your life to see if they can grow with you and to see if they are really good long-term options for relationships, talk to them about your abandonment wound. And I don't mean go emotionally dump on the people in your life. Take accountability for your wounds. But if you explain to them, hey, I'm really working on trying to heal my abandonment wound right now, because when I was a child, my parents were really inconsistent. They forgot to feed me. They were hot and cold emotionally. They would say horrible, mean things to me. And now I'm really afraid of being abandoned and rejected, and I'm trying to heal that through my relationships. So if it's okay with you, there might be times where I reach out just to make sure that I didn't offend you or make you uncomfortable, or just to get some reassurance that we're still friends and that you're still interested in building this relationship with me. And I would really, really appreciate your honesty. And I'm really committed to trying to be a good friend. So thank you for hearing me and for holding my emotional experience. And I love you and I'm grateful. I would say something along those lines. And, with my best friend and with the relationships that I, at this point, know are going to last me the rest of my life. And it was hard to find those people. But the way that I did was by front loading the weird, difficult aspects of myself so that it was clear from the get-go, and so that we could co-create a relational dynamic that worked for both of us, where we're aware of each other's flaws and weaknesses and wounds. So for example, there was a time when I was traveling with my best friend in Mexico, and we were with another great, lovely friend as well. And I could see that they were bonding so much and they were becoming really close. And there was a part of me that got a little insecure and afraid of being abandoned as her best friend. And so I talked to her about it and I was like, hey, I don't want to be weird, but I low-key get scared that one day you'll decide that I'm not your best friend and you just mean so much to me. And so I just want you to know that I love you and I'm sorry and I could use some reassurance. And it was really funny because she ended up kind of bringing back a really similar fear that she had come up that day. And we deepened our friendship as a result. And so people will either meet your depth and you'll experience the most profound relationships, or people will show you how deep they can go. And then you know how much you can rely on them and how deep you can go with them. And you can keep searching for those core people that you can really be all of yourself with. And it can be difficult because there are people that we have to mask around. There are people who can't meet us on the deepest levels. And maybe they are friends that are like great to go socialize with, but they don't know how to hold us emotionally. Or maybe we have friends who we can only connect with emotionally, but not socially because they get anxious. And that's okay. So learning to be adaptable in our relationships while also testing, being able to have our needs met and to co-regulate is really supportive. And if you have friends who you think might be open to practicing co-regulation with you or a partner, I love introducing the concept of co-regulation to my friends by just even holding hands and breathing together, or putting a hand on each other's heart and breathing together, especially when I have really calm friends. Honestly, I am usually the friend that people co-regulate to, and I like to offer my nervous system to other people because when we're around other people, we're essentially playing like nervous system hot potato. So if you've ever been at a supermarket and someone's like freaking out on their phone and they just start bad vibes, and then all of a sudden you feel like this anxious energy in your chest, and you go home to your partner and you pick a fight for no reason, and you don't even realize that what happened is that you picked up someone else's nervous system response and you began that game of like hot potato. So when you learn how to discharge your emotional reactions, which is something that I also love to teach my clients, and you learn how to regulate your own nervous system, you also become an anchor for other people's nervous systems. And so when my friends are, anxious or going through it, I really love to be that friend that kind of leads by example and says, hey, like, borrow my nervous system. Let me give you a hug. Let me play with your hair. And simultaneously, for me in my life, I feel the most comfortable co-regulating with my mom, with my best friend, and with my boyfriend. And he just knows how to hold me. He's such a grounded person. And so I'll just lay on him, or I'll just, ask him for a hug and just stay there until I feel that fear of abandonment or rejection or whatever emotional trigger comes up for me dissolve. And the more that you do this work, the more you'll become attuned to when you do need other people, because we are relational creatures. When you really are able to meet your needs yourself, and mind you, you are always capable of meeting your own needs, but it's totally normal to crave and want connection from others. So if you don't yet have people in your life that you feel like you can co-regulate with, or that you feel like you can front load the weirdness with, keep looking for them. Go to events where people are emotionally and spiritually more conscious, and practice meeting your needs yourself, so that by the time you meet people who are ready to meet your depth, you know that you can hold your end of the relationship by being someone who really honors and takes care of yourself. And when you meet someone else who can mirror that back to you, those are the most fulfilling relationships in the world. And for me personally, on my journey, it was something that I was very much doing on my own, self-regulating and meeting my own needs myself for a couple of years before I really met my core people that can meet me and hold me back. And I know it can be difficult sometimes, but I hope you know that I'm here for you and my community is here for you. And it's one of my highest joys to create retreats and online communities where people can really have a place to connect spiritually, emotionally, energetically, and mentally over these deeper concepts of self. So it is really, really important to do the unlearning work and to reprogram your secondary identity. I believe that your primary identity is the soul essence that you came into this world with when you incarnated in your mother's womb. That is your spiritual identity, but then your secondary level of identity is the learned identity that you learn through observing your primary caretakers, your teachers, your first relationships. And this is where most of the difficult behaviors and the wounds like abandonment come from, that we want to put in the effort to heal so that we can get better with age instead of bitter. And I promise you that it is possible. I love teaching my program Wonder Child because as I have gotten older, people literally think I look, sound, and act younger. And it's because I have developed such a childlike wonder as I move through life that I did not have in my younger years when I was actually really bitter about life for points of my teenage years specifically. So it is one of my highest joys to provide people with the tools to heal emotional wounds. Because when you can decode your wounds and meet your own needs, you can learn to create self-trust and wonder within yourself, and life can become so, so beautiful. So I think that's enough on the abandonment and the rejection wound for now. I definitely have more to say on this subject, so definitely leave a comment or send me a message if you would like me to do a part 2, or if you have any other requests for podcast episodes. So just remember that you are so capable of meeting your own needs and nurturing and loving yourself in the ways that you secretly crave for other people to nurture and love you. And learning how to meet your own needs and to love and nurture and protect yourself will create a base level of love within your identity so that you no longer feel resistance to merging with love and to receiving and asking for the love that you deserve. So just know that you are so worthy of relationships and friendships and connections in which you feel safe, but it begins with you. And again, if you have any questions or if you would like to see a part 2 on this topic, definitely make sure to comment below. And if you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the absolute world if you could leave us a review on Spotify or on Apple. And if you do leave a review and you screenshot it and you email it to hello@beladivine.com, Bella's with 1 L, we will gladly send you one of my favorite meditation practices. It's a subconscious and somatic practice to support you in creating a deeper sense of wholeness and self-trust. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.